Amazing. Well, what we're doing here tonight is there's a group of people that come to hear lectures, and Shirley and I decided that this would be a good place to have kind of a slideshow on the history of Albanians in Italy. Already some people came in there from Macedonia, Albanians from Macedonia. An Italian guy came from Brooklyn, says his parents were born in Basilicata, where another Albanian-speaking town in Italy. There are 51 of them, as we will point out, because we have a map to show the Italians. Italians don't really know the history of the Albanians, that they were there from 1461, when they were brought in with the Albanian general to defend the Kingdom of Naples. Don't forget, Italy was not a country until 1861. That's when it was unified, and Albanians are British Albanians, the ones that were there from the 15th century, helped Garibaldi to do that. In fact, one of them, Francesco Crespi, became the Prime Minister of Italy, and I think it was 1880 something. But in any case, let's now walk in. We'll be starting pretty soon, and what this is about is building a good bridge between the Albanian and the Italian people. They know each other, but a lot of Albanians don't know the history of why Italy was an asylum for them when the Ottoman Turks drove them out of Albania in the year 1480. And they've been there, free, speaking their language. Even in grammar school, the Albanian language is paid for in southern Italy by the Italian government. It's a wonderful experience for Albanians, since they don't get that kind of respect in the Balkans from Serbia or from the Slavs that control a lot of the Albanian lands today. In any case, let's walk in. This is going to be the new, I just want to just get this on. This will be the new museum when they've already applied for the construction permits. Money's been allocated, and as you can see, it's going to be very different and beautiful. Nice. Okay, so we'll now wait. You can see Shirley talking to Dr. Shelza here, and people are starting to come in. We didn't expect a big crowd, but we wanted to at least let people know that it's important for the Italians to understand the history of Albanians in Italy. We have a little booklet we're going to give out as well at the end, and this is kind of a test or a model for what we're going to do at the Columbus Foundation. Because the president there, Angelo Vivo, wants us to do it there. We usually get a very big crowd and give 2 speeches. Because the membership, there's a membership there that comes to the events once a month, so we're going to have that.
Fortunately for me, I had some friends, and 2 of them are here this evening. We're going to give a presentation, Joseph and Shirley DioGuardi, and you should give them a round of applause. Because without them and their friend Jerry Nadler, Congressman Nadler, this room wouldn't be here. We would not have been able to do this. And we were able to, even in that difficult time, manage to build this out, this one space, so that at least we could have programs like this and art exhibitions, which next one coming in will be of actually the new museum that's coming. So thank you again, Shirley, Jill, and Jerry. Unfortunately, can't be here. But at this point, I'm going to give the floor over to my good friend Joe. And believe me, I mean this sincerely. Without these 2 people up here and their friend Jerry Nadler, you wouldn't be sitting in this room today. That's the truth. Thank you, Joe. Thank you.
You never know what you're going to be when you grow up. I turned 77 this year, and I like to tell people, I still don't know what I'm going to be when I grow up. That's the way you have to approach life. You have to be open-minded, you have to be positive, and you have to be open to opportunities, because you don't know which doors will open. And why do I give you that story? I was raised in the Bronx. My dad came here in 1929 from a little town outside of Naples, about 40 kilometers, called Greci. Did I know when I was a kid that that is the first of the 51, and you're going to see it when Shirley speaks, 51 Albanian-speaking towns in Italy today. Shirley and I brought National Geographic there in 1999 because they wanted to trace these refugees coming from Kosovo. And when they called me, because nobody else had a website that had anything about Albanians, they said, could you come with us? I said, why are you doing a story about the refugees from Kosovo? I thought you were a humanitarian magazine. You should be talking about the Albanian people, their nation. There were many Albanians already there. Well, we didn't know that. I said, well, I'll go with you if you come with me to my father's village, Reci, and a few others that are not too far, 4 others. Shirley and I did that and opened up the mind. In fact, they were supposed to do another story, they don't do a story except for every 15 years. So I'm now starting to put pressure on them to go back to Italy to see how the Albanians have done in all these years, especially the refugees from Albania in 1990 and Kosovo in 1999. And Albanians like their land. They don't necessarily stay where they come unless they have very good jobs. They like to go back. So Italy today could have had millions of Albanians, but it was a place where they found refuge, asylum, and then they returned to their land, just like they did when, you remember, this guy Milosevic ethnically cleansed Kosovo and 1 million people were sent into Macedonia, right? No one ever thought they'd all come back. Every one of them came back and rebuilt all those houses that were burned. That's who the Albanian people are. They're tied to their language, they're tied to their history, they're tied to their land, and you can't beat them in the long run. No one's been ever able to assimilate them or conquer them, and they've had run-ins with the Romans, the Greeks, the Turks, the communists, who are Albanian and others, and they're still standing on their 2 feet on their ancestral lands, 7 million of them in the Balkans, speaking the language that preceded the Roman language. The Illyrian language, the Albanian language today, has no roots and no branches. It's one of the oldest Indo-European languages in the world, and it survived all these years. It's an amazing story. People don't know it. Now, why are we doing this today? Well, one of the things that Shirley and I are doing, besides lobbying in Washington, we have 3 organizations for the Albanian people to carry on the work I started when I was elected to Congress in 1985, and everybody thought I was Italian-American, which I am, because my parents are born in Italy. My mother's from the Bari area, my father's from the Naples area. But my father spoke this special language that when we were kids in the Bronx, we called Yegina, Albanese. I didn't know it was a separate language. Imagine that. I'm being raised in the little Italy section of the Bronx. My mother and father were married in the church that was the Italian-American church of the day, that was Mount Carmel. I went to Catholic schools right around the corner, St. Martin of Tours, and I grew up thinking that I was only an Italian-American. I didn't know about this culture, this subculture. Now, why didn't I know? The people who came here, like my dad, these were poor people from the Campania region of Italy, farmers. They had no education. Dad only went to the 4th grade in an Italian school. When he came here in 1929, what did he do? He was in Harlem, had to shine shoes, had to sell vegetables. So he never had a chance to get an education. I'm his oldest son, oldest child. We have 3, a sister and brother, younger than I am. So we then had this store in the Bronx, Fremont Avenue, right outside of the Little Italy section, and that's where I was kind of raised, in the back of that store. After, grammar school, I had to go there with my brother and sister. I'm the oldest, so, they did little things, I had to do bigger things. And then when I went to high school, my father didn't let me off the hook. I was raised very European. It's important for the Albanian people to know that. They want to know, where did you get all this energy? Where did you get all this, how would you say, motivation and discipline? When you're raised with European parents in America, and my mother went to the 8th grade here because she had to stop before she met my father. She met him here. She had 5 sisters, but her parents came here from Bari. They couldn't work. They didn't have jobs. So all 5 sisters had to work in factories making ties and bring the money home. So that's my background. It's not, my Italian roots don't go back to 1850. A lot of the people you see in these pictures, they came here very early. My folks came here later on. So here it is that I'm in the back of a grocery store, seeing my parents on their feet, 10, 12, sometimes on Saturdays, 14 hours a day. We're working with them, and we thought that was, the reality. But that gave me the strength that I needed to do well. Not only did I do well with Dad and Mom in the store, I did well in high school. I went to Fordham Prep, Jesuit school. I went to Fordham University. So you might say I'm the first one in my whole family ever to go to high school. And that's America for you. I'm not telling you just my story. This is the land of opportunity, and my father always said it, if you work, you're going to succeed. And that's really the answer. People who work succeed. That's what makes America work. So, here I am now at 44, and I'm saying to myself, I'm very well, making a lot of money in the world's largest accounting firms. My tax return showed in 1985 that in 1984 I was being paid $238,000. What's $238,000 today? It's a lot of money, right? At least $1 million, maybe $2 million. My salary as a congressman, a job I almost didn't get. I had to win on election day. You had to count it 3 times because no one knew me. Thank God there were enough Italians and enough other Roman Catholics that were Portuguese, Lithuanian, Polish, and I worked very hard with my parents, and we won by 1,000 votes on election day out of 300,000. So now I'm a congressman, okay? Albanians didn't know me, and I didn't know Albanians. I knew we had this language. My first birthday party as a congressman, it's a tradition, is a fundraiser, because you have another race, you have to run for Congress again. And on September 20th, 1985, I was 45 years old. Albanians came to that, not knowing that I had this subculture and that my father spoke this Arbrecht, which is really Albanian. And they came running up to me when they overheard my father speaking to his younger sister, Arbrecht, Albanian. They said, hey, we thought you were Italian American. Yes, I am. But my father speaks this language that comes from before, and I think it's a dialect of the Italian language. They said, no. And these Albanians were from Yugoslavia, and here's my father speaking to them. And it hits me like a brick that my dad has been speaking this language that has nothing to do with Italian. It's the Albanian language. So what happened after that? And that leads us to what we're here today for. I get lobbied day and night by Albanians from Macedonia, from Kosovo. Not from Albania. Why? Because communism was so bad that they were locked just like North Korea today. If you left, you'd be shot. If you tried to get in, you'd be shot. And that didn't happen until 1990. This is 1985. But Albanians from every place came to my house, to my office, giving me books, giving me I have a huge library. A lot of it's in Albanian, but it'll be put in a nice place somewhere in the Balkans someday, because a lot of it's signed by important people. But this is the way I then learned the history of my father. And by the time I ran my second race against Bella Rabza, you remember the woman with the hat, that I had to beat her to stay in another 2 years, Albanians then knew who I was. We already had, rallies and other things to talk about what was wrong with the Albanians in Kosovo in particular, and they were very helpful. So why are we here? We're here because we have 3 organizations. One is a registered lobby, the Albanian American Civic League. Another is a foundation to educate people. Who are the Albanian people? Why should the Jewish people know them? Why should the Albanian people know them? And that's the subject today. The big bridge that we have based on the history, a very valid, long, beautiful history of Albanians in Italy, which you're going to hear today. Then we have also a political action committee, which we call the Albanian American Public Affairs Committee. This is an organization that gives money, like NADLA. NADLA gave hundreds of thousands of dollars here to get this room done, and Shirley and I lobbied him for Joe Shelter to do it. And he did it. Why? This is his neighborhood, okay? And I figured, what better thing could we do than this? And Joe is an excellent spokesman, and he made the case, and he got the money. That was when Washington had more money than it has now. It's going to be very difficult to get that kind of money today. So I could go on and talk about, I just wanted you to know why today I am proud to say I'm Albanian and Italian. And I've made other Italians proud to do that. And I made some who had Irish names like Regis Philbin. You're going to see those pictures. Regis Philbin has a mother that's born in my father's town, Gretchen. Her name is Filomeno Boscia. He never wanted to admit it, but I got him to come out. I got him out of the closet, so to speak. And there are others now in another club, or another foundation I belong to, on 69th and 5th, the Columbus Citizens Committee and Columbus Citizens Foundation. There are people there that have told me, it's almost like they don't want anybody to hear it. Joe, I've been hearing Albanian. My grandmother spoke Albanian. I said, Larry, that means you're Albanian. That's Mr. Oriana. Now he doesn't mind me mentioning his name. And then you're going to see the picture of a congresswoman. Her name is Morella, Connie Morella, very famous congresswoman from Maryland. And she finds out about this, and she comes up in a very quiet voice and says, Joe, you know what my maiden name is? Albanians. We spoke Albanian. And here she is in Congress, didn't admit it. So we're trying to give the Italians this feeling that they should be really proud to embrace this old culture like I did, you know? And when you hear the history of the Albanian people, it's amazing. We're trying to do a movie now on a great Albanian general that we think, and everybody thinks, saved Europe from Islam. It's going to be a very complicated thing. You had to beat the Turks to do it, and he did it for 25 years. But that's not yet ready to go. But we need to put this kind of information out. So at this point, I would like to turn it over to Shirley. We have up here, you can see that nice little story. This is my father's village. This is the highest mountain between Naples and Bari. The Albanians always thought the Turks would be chasing them. This was settled in 1461. They didn't build this. This was a Greek farming village from the year 535. Would you believe it? 535. The first millennium was 535. Everything was Greek. Now, what was Naples called back in the 11th century? Neapolis. It was a Greek name. Everything from the time of Christ to the 11th century was Greek in southern Italy. And that's why this town, people want to say, Joe, you say Albanian, but that's Greci, that means Greek. Yeah, because that's the original name of this big trading village from the year 535 called Greci. Okay? So a little history over here. Now, the Greeks have, we can't get into too much of the history because there are problems with Greece, there's problems with Russia. If you're Albanian, you got problems with almost everybody. Serbia for sure. They still don't want to. They still don't want to give up on saying that Kosovo is an independent state, and yet Shirley and I had a lot to do with that with our friends in Washington. And Jerry Nadler, Joseph was one of them. Tom Lantos, Jerry Nadler, Ben Gilman, both sides of the aisle always, Democrat and Republican. Now, I told you that I brought National Geographic to Italy. When they called me in 1999, because we had the only website that said Albanian, they didn't know who to call, and they wanted me to go there to the Straits of Otranto. That is the closest point, and you'll see it on the map that Shirley's going to show you, between Albania and Italy. Only 40 miles separate Albania and Italy. So we went there, but I told them, if I go, you got to do a story on the history of Albanians in Italy, at least go to these villages like my father's. And they agreed, and this is what came out. Shirley and I spent a week with the senior editor, Preet Veselin. He was an Estonian American. He couldn't believe that they had all these old villages in Italy from the 15th century. And he did a story here. He finally did a story on what he wanted to do was Kosovo, but he did a much bigger one on the Albanian people. And this is kind of a collector's item, Joe, and I'm going to let you have it here because I think it's important to have. Back in 1480, or 88, when finally the Turks overran Albania, all Albanians were Christian. So they were brutalized, much like ISIS did today, the Albanians. That's why they ran into Italy. But we're not looking, this is not a religious issue, not trying to create that. But it was the Albanian people that saved Islam, Europe from Islam, and Shirley did that. I'm just with that. Let me bring up Shirley. And
without a microphone? Yes. That's good? Okay, great. I'm going to take these back in history, but I first want to thank Dr. Scelza for a wonderful introduction about the importance of this museum, about the importance, by the way, in my opinion, also of Albanians and Italians coming together. And tonight you should know that there are at least 4 members of the board of the Albanian American Civic League and Foundation here. So I'm going to take you now back in history, and it's 500 years ago, because that's when Albanians started to play a very vital role in the history of southern Italy. So the story actually begins in earnest in 1461 when the King of Naples, and that was Ferdinand I, he was the son of a recently deceased King Alphonse, and Pope Pius II, they appealed to the Albanian military because they needed to thwart a second French invasion. The first was several years before, in 1443. And in response, the legendary George Castriati, who came to be known as Skenderbeg, led an elite cavalry of 4,000 men across the Adriatic Sea to Italian territory. Today's, and Joe mentioned this before, today's Albania and Italy, they're only 40 miles apart from the Straits of Otranto. This is the narrowest point. And so Skenderbeg's forces came across and drove out the French in what was called the famous Battle of Apulia near Naples. And in so doing, Castriati saved the Kingdom of Naples from the French. He returned to Albania shortly after because he needed to continue what was a 25-year war against the domination by the Ottoman Turkish Empire. By the time he died of pneumonia in 1468, he had fought against the Ottoman Turks and then laid the groundwork for free and democratic states in Europe. And this is why Castriati, and Albanians in this room know, I don't know whether others know, he became a towering figure of the 15th century, not only for Albanians, but for all Europeans. And this would last well into the 19th century. He was a military genius, he was a philosopher, he was master of several languages, he was a diplomat, and he was about Catholic. And in the course of those 3 centuries, he would become the subject of numerous books in many languages. I don't know whether some of you know poems by Longfellow and Lord Byron, and an opera by Vivaldi. Statues of his iconic figure, you'll see this later because Joe's going to go through a PowerPoint that will include his sort of famous picture, sword in hand, atop this majestic stallion, very, very large individual. They've been dedicated to him in Rome, Vienna, and Budapest. Castriati, you need to know something about how this came to be, was the son of an Albanian prince named John Castriati. And he kept, it was John, his father, who kept the invading Ottoman Turks at bay for about 20 years until he and other Albanian leaders were unfortunately forced into what was a deceptive treaty in 1422 with a sultan of the time, Murad II, to secure the rear of the Turkish army in Southeast Europe on the one hand, but he wanted to spare the lives of the Albanian people from the Ottoman Empire. Now, to guarantee the arrangement, the Sultan, and this was very common, by the way, on the Ottoman side, took John's 4 sons as hostages and sent them into the Ottoman military academy in the capital called Adrianopolis, today's Istanbul. The superb academic and military record of George Castriati, who was the youngest son, caught the attention of the Sultan, who ultimately gave him the rank of general at the age of 19, and this is where you get the honorific name Skenderbeg. It was Iskender Bey, better known as Skenderbeg, in memory of Alexander the Great. In 1443, Skenderbeg receives suddenly word that his father and mother have been murdered by the Ottomans, occupying his native hometown of Kruja in Albania. And because John, his father, was well known as the leader of the Albanian opposition to the Ottomans, Skenderbeg immediately knew that with his death, he sensed the danger to the Albanian people, excuse me. So he seized the moment, and when he was sent on a military excursion to defeat the Hungarians, this is a whole separate war that I'm not going to go into, with his prowess, he distracted the attention of his fellow Ottoman commanders, and he fled the battlefield for Albania with 300 of his most loyal horsemen. And after triumphantly entering Albania, he stormed what still is there today, a gleaming white castle at Kruja, and he deposed the Ottoman governor. And that's when, for the next 25 years, as I said before, he would perform some of the greatest military feats that would safeguard Europe from the incursion of Islam by the Ottoman Empire. The historical partnership between Italians and Albanians is actually grounded in Greci, Italy, which is right here. And it's a mountaintop village, as Joe said before. And the reason this is the focus of everything is that Ferdinand gave Greci to Skanderbeg and his soldiers out of gratitude for saving the Kingdom of Naples. So the security of the kingdom was also assured, and it was Ferdinand who insisted on it, when Castriati decided to leave 2,000 troops behind in Greci while he returned to Albania to continue again to defend, the country from Ottoman Turkish domination. So the troops that were left behind in Greci, and as you've already learned from Joe, his father is one of the descendants of these soldiers who bore his paternal grandmother's maiden name, Tosi. That's one of the major Albanian families in the history of Greci. It was only after Skanderbeg's death in 1468 that the Ottomans were able to finally get a foothold, unfortunately, in Albanian lands and completely overtook them in 1480s. It was then that many thousands of Albanians fled across the Adriatic Sea to the Kingdom of Naples and beyond in search of freedom from Turkish domination. And in addition to Greci, and you learned this from Joe, they would ultimately establish 50 more Albanian-speaking villages that would flourish. They're thriving today. They're in the southern Italian regions of Campania, Puglia, Calabria, and Sicily. The Albanian refugees, known as the Arbresh, in all of those years, over 425 years of often brutal Ottoman-Turkish occupation of Albanian lands, they were able to preserve Albanian cultural traditions, language, and their Catholic heritage. This is why the Arbresh remain attached to Albanian lands, but it's also why Albanians remain forever attached to Italy. Italy has been an exemplar of tolerance. To this day, in its 51 Arbresh-speaking villages, both the Albanian and Italian languages are spoken, and both the Albanian and Italian language flags, they fly in front of municipal properties. This is exactly the opposite of what we've seen, for example, in Eastern Europe, beginning with the Balkan Wars. Joe's going to, I think, explain this in more detail. We'll find out because you've spoken at length. But the Arbresh have made major contributions over centuries to Albanian life and culture. He's going to, I know you're going to talk about this, some of the major contributors, but it includes notables such as Francesco Cristi, who joined Garibaldi in the creation of the unified Italian state in 1861, something I think that a lot of Italians are not aware of. And he became prime minister in 1887. After the fall of the Ottoman Empire in 1912, Albanians once again found themselves in another just horrifying situation. They were battling Slavic incursion. So they go from 450 years of Ottoman Turkish domination. Now they're dealing with Slavic incursion, and it begins with the Balkan Wars in 1912 to 1913. This was involving, unfortunately, with the ascent of the so-called great powers at that time. It's Austria-Hungary, Britain, France, Germany, Italy, and Russia. Albanians were artificially and unfairly divided. And it's only because of the intervention of then U.S. President Woodrow Wilson at the end of World War I in 1918 that the Albanian state was, a truncated state of Albania was created. And by the way, it's because of Woodrow Wilson's actions that the Albanian love for America is will never die. It began then. So today, as a result, there are 3.5 million Albanians that live in Albania proper, and then another 3.5 live side by side on its borders in Kosovo, an independent nation as of 2008, Macedonia, Montenegro, the Preševa Valley, which is in southern Serbia, and Chamria, which is northern Greece. Another 8 million live in the diaspora, primarily in the U.S. We have about 750 Albanians here. Western Europe, Turkey, and Australia, because they fled Slavic state-sponsored terrorism and later communism well into the 20th century. Modern Italy has continued the historical partnership between Italians and Albanians, and most notably, and Joe, I think you mentioned this, in 1991 when communism fell in Italy, and again in 1998, 1999 when Serbia conducted the genocidal war in Kosovo. Italy once again opened its doors to thousands of Albanian refugees. Many would eventually return to Albania and Kosovo, but those who did not have made their contributions to the ethnic Albanian presence in Italy, now about 800,000. And it has been, they have, and they will continue to be a vital part of the Italian nation for centuries, without question. So, with that, I'd like to turn the...
Thank you. Thank you.
Back and forth historically and into the present, right? With first the picture of Gretchen.
You can see this beautiful town. The
Where we
church
were
was always
last
put at the
September.
highest point. You can see the steeple there is the church of St. Bartolomeo. Every Albanian village, like the Italian villages, don't forget the Roman Catholic, has a patron saint. And the patron saint here is St. Bartholomew, one of the apostles. And that's a modern day picture of it. You stand at the top and you look off and you think you're looking at the universe. It's unbelievable how high it is. And they were given a beautiful, I guess they were so happy to get it because Albanians, from what I read back in those days, were always thinking the Turks would be after them. And they always wanted to stand on a high position as they have in Albania. That's why Skanderbeg was so successful, because he knew how to use those mountains against the Turks. Okay? All right, now, what I'm going to do, and I'm going to let you have these, Joe, if you could give, you don't have to, I'm not going to use many words, I'm going to use these visuals. But in here are the words that you would want, especially for the next slide. These are the 51, we did the research. These are the 51 Albanian-speaking villages in Italy today. And what you see first is the region. Abruzzi, Molise, Campania, Calabria, Basilicata. Any more? And then over here, mainly in Calabria, you got 4 in Sicily. I have 3 listed here. Now, what you have then is the province in that region. So if you take Grecci, it's in the province of Avellino. And then if you take Basilicata, I know my wife who died, her mother was born, so my daughter Cara has 2 Albanian grandparents, because her mother was born in Barile, an Albanian-speaking village or town in Basilicata. You can see all the ones in Calabria here. So, and we also researched the Italian name today and the Albanian name. So each one has an Albanian name and an Italian name. Sometimes they're pretty close. Okay? So, with that, you saw that. Okay. This is, by the way, when we went to Grecci, this is George Castriati, Skanderbeg. This is the symbol of the Albanian people, the double-headed eagle. It's on their flag. The flag is red with that black eagle on it. But what was amazing to me is to go to Grecci and find their books with this cover on it. Because here I am in America knowing that how important he is, but I didn't realize until I got to Grecci, and this was not the first time when I took my father, but the second time when I was a congressman, and I realized that they really have this history in their soul. And that's the truth about, George Castriati. In fact, every one of these 51 villages has a statue or a bust of George Castriati. And in my father's village, Grecci, the main thoroughfare is via Skanderbeg. That's how wedded they are to that man who did a lot for them in Italy and then he did a lot afterwards. Okay, this is, here it is. Here's via Skanderbeg in my father's town, Gretchen, all right? You can see how small, the cars can get through there. Now, here's one of the trips I took with Shirley, and here she's standing by a sign, Grecci e Fieto. Now, Katundi. See, even in Italy, they use the word Katundi when you're near, they don't mind using Albanian words. Now, but look at Grecci Fieto. And the one thing I want to mention that you didn't mention is that Fieto is the town today, if you went, they're speaking French, the old French.
No,
Shirley says
they're
Provençal.
speaking Provençal.
Now, those were the soldiers that Skanderbeg beat. They didn't go back. They found a hill right there, the hill where Grecci is. It's called Fieto, and we went to visit them. And sure enough, it's you would think you're in southern France someplace. They have their own dialect. All right. Okay. Interesting stuff, huh? Yeah. And that's why I want to take National Geographic back there because I think we need to have this. Here is an iconic figure of George Castriati on his horse with his sword. He was such a powerful man physically that when they made the swords to fight the Turks, they had to make a sword with twice as much metal. There's a story that he cut one in half. That's how powerful he was. It could have been exaggerated, but there were other stories when he was in Turkey that a huge Persian came to challenge, and Murad the Sultan went, and he was a general. No, he wasn't a general at that point. He was like 18. He said, who amongst you is going to take this man on? Nobody would step forward. And Skanderbeg stepped forward and killed this huge Persian guy. That's one of these stories that you read when you start doing history. So he was special, but he was a special intellect as well. And he was a favorite of the Pope. When the Pope needed someone to come to rescue the Kingdom of Naples because of the alliance of the Pope with King Alphonse, who had died, the son wasn't as strong as the father, he called Skanderbeg. He went to Skanderbeg personally, and Skanderbeg left the battle, and he said, I can't do it, I'm fighting the Turks. But because the Pope and the son of the king, and also, by the way, King Ferdinand of Spain, that's where Ferdinand's, the son was named after the King Ferdinand of Spain. Naples was very much allied with Spain at that time. And this is the King Ferdinand and Isabella, by the way, that we know funded Columbus. In any case, let me go through these things quickly. Now, National Geographic, as I said, I only have a few copies of these, but I'm going to give one here because I want Joe to have it. It's a collector's item. And they did do the story that I wanted to tell, the story of the Albanian people, not just the refugees coming from Kosovo. And I told this, and he said, what am I going to name it? I said, well, you know, when my father in the Bronx heard people speaking this strange language, as a kid, I thought it was, as I said, dialect of Italian. He would get closer and closer, whether it was on a picnic in Pelham Bay or Orchard Beach, and then finally, when he realized that these were people of his own, blood, he would grab them and hug them, and he always used two words, Jaku I Shprishu. And I knew those words from a kid, even though I didn't know the Albanian language, I know words, because I was raised with my Albanian grandmother, the Tozi, that Shirley mentioned. And that translated literally into English means lost blood or dispersed blood. So when I told that to Preet Veselin, he says, I'm going to name this story, I'm going to write, Albanians are people undone. In other words, dispersed, and they were really divided, as Shirley said, unfairly after World War I. Now, I'm going to take you through some pictures. Everybody goes to Rome. When you go to Rome, if you go into the Clement room, that's the Albanian room. Why? Because we had an Albanian pope, Clement the IX. And his name of his family was Albani. See, it says Francesco Albani. He became Pope Clement the 11th. Mm-hmm. There it is. And if you hear of anybody, now we used to have a politician, an Italian-American politician, Vince Albano, Brooklyn. He had Albanian blood. And as I told you, if you find someone with the name Albanese, we had a New York City councilman, Sal Albanese, try to go further.
He tried to run for mayor.
Yeah, but he was Albanian. And I'll show you Congresswoman Connie Morella comes up to me and says, Joe, I know you're talking about these Albanians. I have to tell you in a low voice, she says, I'm Albanian too. My name is Balkans, my native name. So we got to make Italians more proud to admit they're Albanian. And that's what this is all about. Here's both sides. Here's Francesco Crispi. He was Albanian on both sides. He's from the people who were there in the 15th century, just like my father. And he, like many Albanians, were activists. They fought along with Garibaldi and his people. Not only did they fight physically, they prepared the way for years and years for Italy to be a unified state, and he became the 17th and the 20th Prime Minister of Italy. Another famous, you'll see, by the way, the book I gave you has even more of them. You can read for yourself who each one of these are. Now, I picked this one out because he's famous because of the Albanian Renaissance in Italy. He was a writer, and he picked up from where the many Catholic Franciscan monks who were Albanian did. They brought back the Albanian language. The Turks were looking to extinguish the language. The language was saved by the Albrecht in Italy. They started to write newspapers in Albrecht, the Albanian language, and everything else. Now, here's one that I discovered by accident. I'm a congressman, 1988, and I'm now doing a benefit with Regis Philbin for a wealthy Italian family at Glenallen Casino. In fact, that family owned the casino. And we're sitting, and all these Albanian waiters. In Westchester, you had a lot of Italian restaurants owned by Albanians. Albanian waiters are coming to my table and making a big deal because of what I was doing at that time for them. And Regis then goes to me, Joe, what is this Albanian stuff? And well, Regis, when I got to Congress, I realized, I told him about my father, town Gretchen. He goes, Joe, my mother was born in Gretchen. I said, what? Her name is Philomena Osha. So he never admitted to anybody. I said, would you mind if I out you? That's Albanian. And there it is. His father was Irish, Regis, an Irish king, and his mother was from Gretchen. Well, that's my daughter. And she's proud to say she's Albrecht too. Okay? And that's me, first Albanian American congressman. That means a lot to the Albanians. Okay? Here's Connie Morella, all right? There's a maiden name, Albanese, and she represented a district in Maryland. And after she left, she became the permanent representative to the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. Shirley and I still have a very close relationship with her because she just gave up the presidency of the U.S. Association of Former Members of Congress. That's a new kind of fraternity that I belong to. And they do one of the most extraordinarily big dinners in Washington in a beautiful place, the Mellon Auditorium, and we usually take 1 or 2 tables. And I have Albanians can't afford all the things I do, so I always make sure I have some Jewish friends at the table to pay for the table. And I've been doing that for the last few years. And we help them a lot. That's another story. Now, all the Italians don't meet you Albanese, right? Well, she was Albanian. She wasn't born there, but her parents were, believe it or not. Great opera singer, just passed away. And here are 3 actors that have admitted now on some entity that they have Albanian blood. Danny DeVito, Robert De Niro, and Sylvester Stallone.
He always looked at me.
Excuse me?
He always looked at Sylvester Stallone. When I look at him, I think of my dad. Like, my dad looks like him.
All right, well, now we need to do a gene test, right? Now we can actually do that. But it's amazing if you go back to the grandparents and great-grandparents, one of them from Italy spoke Albanian. And I'm finding that out more and more as people want to ask me, is that the last one? Yeah, that's the last one. A lot of people come up to me and say, Joe, what's this Albanian stuff? You're Italian. And I have to tell them the story. Yeah, my parents were born in Italy.
So I think Jay Leno has also Albanian.
I've heard that.
Yeah. Because they spoke to Regis and they had a conversation, right. And I heard them, they were talking about buka,
Yeah, they remember the word for, like bread, buka, yes, you're right. Well, we have to do more and find out more of it, but there's so many things that we have to do that's more important than that because of what's going on in the Balkans today.
But that's for another time.
Yeah, and in fact, I'm arranging a meeting now. One of the key Albanian politicians Zidane Sella is in Chicago, and he's going to Detroit. He's coming here next week, and I'm arranging for him to meet with the congressman from Staten Island, Dan Donovan, because there's a lot of nonsense going on.
But that's about
the
Macedonia,
Albanians.
it's not about
Yeah.
what, Italy,
They're Albanians living on their ancestral lands in Macedonia, Montenegro, southern Serbia, a place called Preševa, northern Greece,